You are listening to Craziest HOA Moments. This is the pettiest snow emergency ever. Catherine Campbell stood 3 feet from my front door, her phone aimed at the walkway like a weapon, and the wind-driven flurries stung my face as I stepped outside. "You missed the winter deadline and the daily fines start today," she yelled, her voice cutting through the morning cold. I could see frost on her breath and the thin, icy glaze she was filming, a shimmer of frozen melt that had formed overnight. She said she was documenting for the record, and the fine would hit today unless I corrected it in front of witnesses. My stomach dropped because I take care of my disabled brother Marcus, and any towing threat or gate harassment would wreck our entire routine. Catherine repeated that the winter compliance patrol starts at sunrise and I must be ready, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. The preserve at Frostwood Village Association had been tightening rules all season, but this felt like a trap sprung at exactly the wrong moment. I asked what she meant by witnesses, and Catherine gestured toward the mailbox cluster at the end of the block where a plow contractor stood pretending not to listen. She said I had to clear the ice completely, in front of her and the contractor, or the fine would escalate hourly. I told her the glaze had formed after I salted last night, but she cut me off and said I decide what counts as cleared, not you. That phrase hit like a slap because it made clear she was judge, jury, and enforcement all at once. I work as an accountant who keeps a clean ledger and receipts, so I knew this was about power, not safety. She added that I was not the first person she had corrected and I would not be the last, her voice smug and final. I felt trapped on my own porch while Marcus was inside waiting for his morning routine. The stakes were immediate because Marcus depends on me for medication schedules, meal prep, and mobility assistance. Any disruption to my access, towing, or a surprise hearing would leave him vulnerable. Catherine said the notice would be posted within the hour and the HOA claims they could deny gate access if I refused to comply. I asked to see the actual rule in writing, and she laughed and said the Winter Safety Committee does not need to mail you the rulebook every time you violate common sense. Her breath clouded in the cold as she tapped her phone screen, and I knew she was already drafting the group chat post. The neighborhood group chat had become her public shaming tool, and I had seen her paint other homeowners as hazards during storms. She said the plow berm at the end of my driveway proved I had caused improper snow placement, even though the plow company had dumped it there without asking. I pointed that out, and she said the HOA holds me responsible for anything that ends up on my property line. Catherine turned and walked toward the mailbox cluster, her red parka bright against the snow. I went back inside and checked the doorbell camera footage from last night. The timestamp showed me salting the walkway at 9:30, and the glaze had formed after midnight when temperatures dropped below freezing. I saved the clip to my phone and texted my neighbor Leo, who had helped me before when the HOA tried to fine me over holiday lights. Leo had a drone and a habit of capturing overhead views during disputes, and I knew I would need him soon. Marcus called from his room asking if everything was okay, and I lied and said it was just a quick HOA check. I did not want to worry him, but my mind was already racing through the invoice trail I had been quietly building. I had noticed the same plow contractor kept getting association jobs, and the landscaping committee always approved his bids without competition. I had started collecting receipts and emails that hinted at favoritism, maybe even kickbacks, but I had not expected to need them this fast. By noon, the group chat post appeared. Catherine had written that an unsafe ice condition had been filmed and documented, and she warned neighbors to avoid my walkway until I corrected the hazard. She did not name me directly, but everyone knew which house she meant because she had been posting about winter violations for weeks. The comments piled up fast, some agreeing with her, others questioning whether the HOA had the authority to fine people for overnight frost. One neighbor asked if the plow contractor was supposed to clear the berms he created, and Catherine replied that homeowners are responsible for maintaining their property lines regardless of how snow arrives. I felt my chest tighten because the post made me look negligent, and I knew it would reach the HOA board within the hour. I texted Leo again and asked if he could fly his drone over the neighborhood to capture the plow damage patterns. He said he would do it this afternoon before the light faded. The first fine notice arrived in my email at 2:15. The subject line said winter compliance violation, and the body listed a $50 immediate penalty plus $20 per day until the hazard was corrected to the satisfaction of the landscaping committee. I opened the attached photo and saw the same thin glaze Catherine had filmed that morning, but the timestamp on the email was from 8:45, which meant she had prepared the notice before even confronting me. That felt deliberate, like she had planned the ambush and already decided the outcome. The notice said I had 24 hours to pay or the fine would double, and it referenced a winter enforcement policy I had never seen. I searched my email for any prior notice about updated rules, but the only thing I found was a vague reminder from November about keeping walkways clear during snow events. Nothing about overnight frost or committee approval for corrections. I called the HOA management company and asked to speak to someone about the fine. The receptionist put me on hold for 10 minutes, then transferred me to a voicemail box that said the compliance department would return my call within 2 business days. I hung up and tried a different number listed on the association website, but it rang to the same voicemail system. I realized the HOA was refusing to accept direct contact, which meant I could not dispute the fine in real time, and they would charge me late fees for their own refusal to respond. That tactic felt illegal, but I did not have time to research it because Marcus needed his afternoon medication, and I had to prep dinner. I let Catherine think I was cornered, because my trump card needed her to overreach. I knew she would escalate again, and when she did, I would have everything I needed to flip the situation. If you are enjoying this chaos, smash that like button and subscribe for more HOA nightmare stories where the rules come back to bite the enforcers. By evening, Catherine had posted again in the group chat. This time she claimed I had damaged common property and must pay immediately or be charged daily. She said the ice on my walkway had caused a slip hazard that extended onto the association sidewalk, and she attached a photo of a wet patch near the curb. The photo was taken at an angle that made it look worse than it was, and I could see her boot print in the slush, which told me she had walked through it deliberately to stage the shot. Leo texted me and said he had flown the drone and captured clear footage of plow berms blocking at least 6 driveways, including mine. He said the contractor had left massive piles of snow on private property without clearing them, and the HOA had done nothing about it. I asked him to send me the raw files with metadata intact, and he said he would drop them off tonight. Catherine showed up at my door again just after sunset. She was holding a megaphone, the same one she used at the mailbox cluster to announce snow rules, and she said the compliance deadline had passed and I was now in violation of emergency winter protocols. I asked what emergency protocols, and she said the Winter Safety Committee had the authority to declare hazards and enforce immediate corrections. I told her I had salted the walkway twice since morning and the glaze was gone, and she said she would decide that after inspecting with witnesses present. She raised the megaphone and called out toward the street, and the plow contractor walked over from his truck. I recognized him from the mailbox cluster that morning, and I knew Catherine was using him as her enforcement prop. She told him to observe while she inspected my walkway, and he nodded but looked uncomfortable, like he did not want to be involved. Catherine walked slowly down my front walkway, shining a flashlight on every inch of concrete. The contractor followed a few steps behind, his hands in his pockets, clearly trying to stay neutral. She stopped near the curb and pointed the flashlight at a tiny patch of frost that had formed in a shaded corner. She declared it a continued violation and said the fine would now triple because I had failed to maintain compliance throughout the day. I asked her to show me the written rule that gave her the authority to inspect private property without notice, and she said the association covenant grants the landscaping committee access for safety inspections. I knew that was a stretch, but I did not have the covenant memorized, and I could not argue it on the spot. The contractor cleared his throat and said the frost patch was in a shadow and would probably melt by morning, and Catherine snapped at him and said she'd decide what counts as cleared, not you. Hearing her repeat that phrase to someone else confirmed she was treating it like a mantra, and I knew it would come back to haunt her. Leo arrived just as Catherine was finishing her inspection. He parked at the curb and walked over with a laptop bag, and Catherine immediately asked what he was doing. Leo said he lived 2 streets over and was just visiting a neighbor, his tone casual but his timing perfect. Catherine looked suspicious, but did not challenge him further. She told me the updated fine notice would arrive tonight, and I had until tomorrow morning to pay or face a lien filing. Then she left, her red parka disappearing into the dark, and the contractor gave me a quick nod before climbing into his truck. Leo came inside and set up his laptop at my kitchen table. He showed me the drone footage, and it was damning. The plow contractor had left berms on at least 8 properties, all within the same loop, and none of them had been fined except me. Leo said the pattern suggested selective enforcement, and he offered to testify if I needed a witness later. That night I could not sleep because I kept expecting another email or a knock at the door. Marcus asked why I was pacing, and I told him the HOA was being difficult about snow removal. He said he trusted me to handle it, and I felt the weight of that trust pressing on my chest. Around midnight, I heard a truck engine idling in front of my house. I looked out the window and saw a flatbed tow truck with its amber lights flashing. Catherine was standing beside the driver, shining a bright flashlight directly at my doorbell camera, and I realized she was trying to blind the recording. The driver looked at my car parked in the driveway, then looked at Catherine, then shook his head. I could not hear what they were saying, but the driver climbed back into the cab and the truck pulled away without hooking anything. Catherine stood there for a moment, her flashlight still aimed at the camera, and then she turned and walked back toward the mailbox cluster. I saved the doorbell footage immediately and texted Leo to let him know Catherine had just attempted a midnight tow. He replied within seconds and said that was probably illegal without proper authorization, and he suggested I contact the tow company directly to ask what paperwork they had been given. I did not sleep the rest of the night. I sat at the kitchen table reviewing every document I had, the drone footage, the doorbell clips, the email trail showing the plow contractor always getting approved, and the invoice copies I had requested under the association transparency rules. The invoices showed the same company, the same contact name, and prices that seemed high compared to quotes I had pulled from competitor websites. I started to see a pattern where Catherine approved every winter contract without competitive bidding, and the plow contractor always left damage that triggered fines against homeowners, which generated revenue for the HOA. It felt like a kickback scheme disguised as safety enforcement. The next morning, Catherine posted in the group chat that a homeowner had obstructed a lawful compliance inspection by intimidating a contractor, and that further violations would result in gate access suspension. I knew she was talking about me, and I knew the claim was false because the contractor had walked away on his own. Leo replied in the thread and said he had been present and saw no intimidation, and he offered to share his account with anyone who wanted the facts. Catherine deleted his comment within minutes and replied that the group chat was for official announcements only. Another neighbor chimed in and asked why some driveways with plow berms were not being fined, and Catherine said each situation is evaluated individually by the committee. That answer was vague enough to avoid accountability, but it confirmed what I already suspected: she was targeting me specifically. I called the tow company that morning and asked to speak to the driver who had come to my house. The dispatcher said they could not give out driver names, but she confirmed they had received a service request from the HOA for a vehicle blocking common property. I told her my car was parked in my own driveway and asked what documentation they had been provided. She put me on hold, then came back and said the request had come from a committee member, not the management company, and they had refused to proceed because the paperwork was incomplete. I asked if they kept a record of who requested the tow, and she said yes, but they could not share it without a subpoena. I thanked her and hung up, knowing I had just confirmed Catherine had tried to bypass proper channels and the tow company had refused to cooperate. That refusal was my first real win, even if Catherine did not know it yet. The second fine notice arrived that afternoon, and it included a line about unresolved damage to common property and an additional $50 charge for non-compliance. The total was now $220, and the email said payment was due immediately or a lien would be filed against my property. I forwarded the email to my attorney friend Rachel, who had helped me review the HOA covenant when I first moved in. She called me within an hour and said the fines were excessive and the lien threat was premature under North Carolina law. She said the HOA had to follow a formal process, including a hearing, before filing a lien, and Catherine was trying to scare me into paying without due process. Rachel offered to send a letter to the management company demanding a hearing and a full accounting of the fines, and I accepted immediately. By the end of the week, Catherine had escalated again. She called an emergency meeting of the landscaping committee and invited only the board members who supported her enforcement approach. The meeting agenda, posted in the group chat, included a discussion of chronic violators and proposed gate access restrictions. My name was not listed, but everyone knew who she meant. Leo texted me and said he had heard from another neighbor that Catherine was planning to present my case as an example of why the HOA needed stronger enforcement powers. I knew this was my chance to deploy the evidence, but I also knew I had to time it perfectly. If I revealed everything too early, Catherine would spin it or bury it in committee minutes no one would read. I needed a public moment where she could not control the narrative. The night before the meeting, I reviewed the security camera footage one more time. The metadata showed Catherine had posted the first fine notice before confronting me that morning, which proved premeditation. The drone footage showed 8 properties with identical plow berms, and only mine had been fined. The invoice trail showed the plow contractor had received every winter job for 3 years running, with no competitive bids. And the tow company dispatcher had confirmed Catherine requested the midnight tow without proper authorization. I compiled everything into a single folder and copied it onto a USB drive. I also printed a timeline with screenshots, because I knew some board members would not trust digital files. Rachel advised me to stay calm during the meeting and let Catherine incriminate herself further before presenting the evidence. She said overreach is the best weapon against petty tyrants, and Catherine was already halfway there. The emergency meeting was held at the clubhouse, but I did not attend. Instead, I drove to the neighborhood gate entrance where the vendor van was parked. The gate system had been glitching for weeks, and the technician was there to pull access logs and diagnose the problem. I knew the logs would show every entry and exit, including the timestamps for Catherine's late-night visits and the tow truck that had shown up at midnight. I parked near the van and waited until the technician finished talking to another homeowner. Then I approached and introduced myself as a resident who had been having issues with gate access. The technician was friendly and said he was reviewing the logs now to find patterns. I asked casually if the logs showed any unusual activity, and he pulled up a screen on his tablet that displayed entry times and badge numbers. The technician scrolled through the logs and pointed out several entries tagged to Catherine's badge number between midnight and 2 in the morning over the past month. He said it was unusual for a resident to be entering and exiting that late unless they worked night shifts, and he asked if I knew whether she did. I said I did not think so, and I asked if he could print the logs for me. He hesitated and said the logs were association property, but he could email a summary to the management company if I filed a formal request. I thanked him and walked back to my car, knowing I had just gotten confirmation that Catherine had been entering the neighborhood late at night, likely to stage violations or deliver notices when no one was watching. That detail would tie together the midnight tow attempt and the early morning confrontation, and it would show a pattern of harassment. The next day, I attended the regular HOA board meeting. Catherine was sitting at the front table with her megaphone beside her, and the room was packed with homeowners who had seen the group chat posts. The board president opened the meeting and said they would address winter enforcement policies under new business. Catherine immediately stood and said she wanted to present a case study of a chronic violator who refused to comply with safety rules. She began describing my situation without naming me. But everyone knew. She said the homeowner had ignored multiple notices, obstructed inspections, and even attempted to intimidate contractors. Leo stood up from the back row and said that was false, and he had witnessed the entire interaction. Catherine told him to sit down because public comment was not allowed during committee reports, but the board president said residents could speak if they had relevant information. Leo walked to the front and said he had been present during the walkway inspection and seen no intimidation. He said the contractor had left on his own, and Catherine had been the one escalating the situation. He also said he had drone footage showing plow berms on multiple properties, and he offered to share it with the board. Catherine interrupted and said drone footage was not admissible because it violated privacy rules, but the board president said he would review it in executive session if Leo wanted to submit it formally. I stood up and said I had additional evidence that the board needed to see before making any decisions about enforcement. Catherine turned and glared at me, and I could see her jaw tighten. She said I had no standing to present evidence because I had not paid the fines, and the board president corrected her and said any homeowner could present information during open comment. I walked to the front and handed the board president the USB drive and the printed timeline. I explained that the footage showed Catherine posting the fine notice before confronting me, which proved premeditation. I showed the drone footage proving selective enforcement, because 8 other properties had identical plow damage but had not been fined. I presented the invoice trail showing the same contractor had been approved for every winter job without competitive bidding, and I suggested the board investigate whether there was a financial relationship between Catherine and the contractor. The room went silent. Catherine stood and said I was making defamatory accusations, and she demanded the board reject my evidence as hearsay. The board president said he would review everything and convene a special session to address the findings. He also said all fines related to my case would be suspended pending the investigation. Catherine's face turned red, and she grabbed her megaphone and said the board was undermining the safety of the entire community by allowing a chronic violator to present false evidence. The board president told her to sit down, and she refused. Another board member asked her directly if she had a financial relationship with the plow contractor, and Catherine said the question was irrelevant because her volunteer work spoke for itself. Leo stood again and said he had heard from other neighbors that the contractor had offered kickbacks to committee members in exchange for exclusive contracts, and he suggested the board audit the landscaping committee budget. Catherine shouted that Leo was lying, and the board president gavelled the meeting to order and said Catherine was out of line. He said the board would vote immediately on whether to suspend her authority as landscaping committee lead pending the investigation, and the vote was unanimous in favor. Catherine tried to speak again, but the board president told her the microphone was being turned off and she would not be allowed to chair any further meetings until the investigation concluded. She grabbed her megaphone and stormed out of the room, and I heard her shouting something about lawsuits as the door slammed behind her. The board president turned to me and said the association would issue a formal apology and a fine waiver in writing with a firm no-contact directive prohibiting Catherine from approaching my property. He also said the board would require actual evidence before fines could be assessed in the future, and they would implement a competitive bidding process for all vendor contracts. I thanked him and sat down, feeling the tension drain out of my shoulders for the first time in weeks. The next morning, I received an email from the management company with the formal apology and fine waiver attached. The email also included a notice that Catherine had been removed as meeting chair and would lose microphone control privileges at all future meetings. A second email arrived an hour later from the board president, confirming that the investigation had found evidence of improper vendor relationships and the plow contractor had been terminated. The email said the HOA would be seeking reimbursement for overcharges, and the board would vote to require actual evidence before fines at the next regular meeting. I forwarded everything to Rachel, who said it was the best outcome I could have hoped for and I should document everything in case Catherine tried to retaliate. Catherine never approached my property again, but I saw her at the mailbox cluster a few weeks later. She was talking to another homeowner about snow rules, and the homeowner cut her off and said they would only accept written notices from the management company, not committee members. Catherine walked away without responding, and I realized her power was gone. The board had stripped her authority, and the neighborhood had stopped listening to her. The doorbell video played at a follow-up meeting, showing Catherine herself posting the violation notice before confronting me, and someone in the audience said she had fabricated the timeline to trap me. Catherine claimed she never came by early that morning, but the timestamp was undeniable. The footage showed her walking up to my door at 7:45, a full hour before she confronted me, and taping a notice to the doorframe. The board president said the evidence confirmed premeditation and selective enforcement, and the HOA voted to require actual evidence before fines. The plow contractor reached out to me a month later and apologized. He said Catherine had pressured him to leave berms on properties she wanted to target, and he had refused to cooperate after the midnight tow attempt. He said he had given the board copies of text messages where Catherine instructed him to prioritize certain streets and ignore others, and those messages had been part of the investigation that got her removed. He also said the new contract required him to clear all berms within 24 hours, and he had already started going back to fix the properties he had damaged. I thanked him and said I appreciated him stepping forward, and he said he was glad the board had taken action because Catherine had been running the committee like a private enforcement agency for years. Leo and I became close friends after the ordeal. He said he had been documenting HOA overreach for months because he suspected Catherine was abusing her position, and my case had been the tipping point that forced the board to act. He showed me a folder of drone footage from other incidents where Catherine had targeted homeowners over minor violations, and we agreed to share the files with the new board members so they could implement better oversight. The board eventually adopted a transparency policy requiring all committee decisions to be published in the monthly newsletter, and they created an appeals process so homeowners could challenge fines without having to attend emergency meetings. The changes felt like a victory for the entire neighborhood, not just me. Marcus noticed the difference in my stress level and asked what had changed. I told him the HOA situation had been resolved, and he said he was proud of me for standing up to them. I realized then that the whole ordeal had been about more than just fines and walkway inspections. It had been about protecting our stability and refusing to let someone weaponize rules to harass vulnerable families. Marcus depended on me, and I could not let Catherine disrupt our routine or threaten our home. Knowing I had fought back and won made me feel like I had done right by him. The final board meeting of the season included a vote to censure Catherine formally and remove her from all committee roles. The motion passed without opposition, and the board president read a statement saying the association would not tolerate selective enforcement or vendor favoritism. Catherine did not attend the meeting, and rumors circulated that she was planning to sell her house and move. I did not feel sorry for her. She had chosen to weaponize her position and harass homeowners, and the consequences were hers to bear. The board also voted to refund fines that had been assessed without proper evidence over the past 2 years, and several neighbors received checks in the mail. I did not get a refund because my fines had been waived, but I appreciated the board taking accountability for past abuses. Spring arrived early that year, and the snow melted fast. The reflective triangle marker I had kept in my pocket during the worst days became a symbol of preparedness, and I kept it in my car as a reminder that sometimes you have to be ready to prove your case when no one is watching. The neighborhood felt quieter without Catherine's megaphone announcements at the mailbox cluster, and people started talking to each other again instead of arguing in the group chat. The new landscaping committee lead was a retired engineer who believed in transparent processes and competitive bidding, and he sent out a survey asking residents what improvements they wanted to see. It felt like the association was finally working for the homeowners instead of against them. I never forgot the moment Catherine said she decided what counts as cleared, not me. That phrase haunted her because it exposed her belief that she was above the rules, and it became the rallying cry for homeowners who wanted reform. Someone even made a joke sign at the next meeting that said, "We decide, not you," and the board president laughed and said it should be the new association motto. Catherine's boomerang line, "You are not the first person I have corrected, and you will not be the last," also came back to bite her when the board discovered she had targeted at least 12 homeowners over fabricated violations in the past year alone. The pattern of abuse was undeniable, and the board had no choice but to act. Looking back, I am grateful I documented everything and stayed calm when Catherine tried to provoke me. The doorbell footage, the drone files, the invoice trail, and the tow company confirmation all came together to build an airtight case that the board could not ignore. Rachel told me later that most HOA disputes are won by whoever keeps the best records, and I had proven that principle in the hardest way possible. The security camera footage with metadata that proved Karen posted the notice herself became the turning point, and I showed the tow yard the paperwork and they refused to keep cooperating. That moment shifted the power dynamic completely, and Catherine lost control of the narrative she had been crafting. The HOA voted to require actual evidence before fines, and the policy change protected every homeowner in the neighborhood. Catherine was removed as meeting chair and lost the microphone control, which ended her ability to dominate meetings and silence dissent. I received a fine waiver in writing with a firm no-contact directive, and Catherine never approached my property again. Those three outcomes, the HOA consequence, the Karen consequence, and the payback vector, delivered exactly the justice I had been fighting for. The board also required the new landscaping committee to publish vendor selection criteria and accept public input before awarding contracts, which closed the loophole Catherine had exploited for years. I still live in the same house, and Marcus and I have settled into a stable routine without the constant threat of HOA harassment. The neighborhood feels friendlier now, and people wave when they see me at the mailbox cluster instead of avoiding eye contact. Leo and I still fly his drone occasionally to capture overhead views of community projects, and the new board appreciates the transparency. The plow contractor does his job correctly now, and the association holds him accountable when he makes mistakes. It feels like the system is working the way it should, with checks and balances instead of unchecked power. Catherine sold her house in late spring and moved to a different subdivision. I heard through the grapevine that her new HOA was much stricter and she was already complaining about overreach, which struck me as deeply ironic. I do not think about her often anymore, but when I do, I remember the moment she stood on my walkway yelling about compliance deadlines while Marcus waited inside for his medication. That memory reminds me why I fought back and why I will never let anyone weaponize rules to hurt vulnerable people. The Preserve at Frostwood Village Association learned a hard lesson about accountability, and I am proud to have been part of that change. I appreciate you spending your time with me, and I will be back soon.